Tonight we will be delving deep into the strange and bizarre, from babysitting gone wrong, to a cabin deep in the woods surrounded by an old secret. These 4 stories are all very different, but terrifying in their own ways. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, feel free to support it with a like and a comment letting me know your thoughts. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm not usually the type to overthink things or get scared easily, but this incident that happened to me a few months back really stuck with me. I used to babysit a lot for people in my town. I guess it was an easy way to make a bit of money as a teen. Before this, nothing really crazy or notable happened to me before, so this really shook me up. I was looking after one of my mom's friend's kids. I'll call him Ryan for the sake of the story. I can't remember exactly, but I think Ryan was about 9 years old at the time, and he seemed like a pretty normal kid. When I first got to the house, the parents showed me around, gave me Ryan's bedtime, you know, the usual. It seemed like it was going to be a relaxing night of watching movies, when the parents left at around 6 p.m. that evening. Ryan and I just played Smash Bros for a couple hours, and watched SpongeBob before he went to bed at 9. After he went to bed, I made myself a bowl of cereal, and got comfortable on the couch. But not even 2 minutes later, I heard what I thought were footsteps coming from upstairs. At first, I just shrugged it off as Ryan going to the toilet or something, but it went on for an unusual amount of time. After another minute or so, I finally decided to go upstairs to check if Ryan was okay, but when I checked in his room, he was fast asleep, even snoring. I thought maybe he rushed to bed and pretended to be asleep when he heard me coming up the stairs, so I let him know I heard him, and went back downstairs, and sat back on the couch. After about 2 minutes later, the footsteps started again. This time I was getting a little bit upset. I went upstairs once again, expecting to see Ryan in a different position in his bed, but this time I noticed something. As I approached the door to Ryan's room, the toilet door across the hall at the other end slowly shut. I quickly peered into Ryan's room, and as much as I didn't want him to be, there he was, in the exact same position as before. My heart stopped. Do I get Ryan out of the house and call the police? Do I investigate myself? Stupidly, I chose the latter. As I edged closer to the bathroom door, a rancid stench filled my nose. It was a strong smell of damp dog. That's the only way I can really explain it. I grabbed a trophy that was on the cabinet next to me. I hesitated, then quickly swung open the door. Nothing. The room was empty, but the window was wide open. Instinctively, I ran to the window and looked outside to see if I could see anything. At the end of the garden, I caught a glimpse of a ragged, dirty, homeless-looking person's body as they climbed over the fence. I woke up Ryan and asked him if he saw anything. He told me he hadn't, and honestly, we were lucky neither of us got hurt. I called the police and told them everything, and they told me to keep all the doors and windows completely closed and locked. Then they assured me that there would be an all-night patrol of the area. It goes without saying, I didn't babysit again after this. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, so can anyone tell me why there was a woman sitting on my couch watching TV? I was in my room getting some work done when I had gotten a bit hungry and planned on walking to the kitchen to get some leftover Chinese. My kitchen sits right next to the living room, and as soon as I stepped into the dark hallway, I noticed the television was on. I know I never stopped to watch anything on it, so this was an immediate red flag. Thinking that maybe it was updating or maybe Alexa had switched it on by mistake, I walked over to turn it off, but my heart dropped when I saw a woman with oily black hair sitting on my couch watching it. For a moment I was confused, because I knew there was no one here when I walked in, and I knew all the doors and windows were locked. From the time I came home, I hadn't heard anyone break in, so how could a person be sitting there? After the confusion passed, I wanted to walk forward and ask what she was doing in my house. But something screamed that that would be a grave mistake. If anyone has ever experienced sleep paralysis, that's what the feeling was like. I told my body to move, but the primal part of my brain refused vehemently. I slowly crept back inside my room and just waited in silence. At this point, I know you're already screaming at me to call the cops, and trust me, I wanted to. Nothing in that moment would have made me feel better than to have 1 or 2 armed police officers there to deal with her, so that I didn't have to. But if I'm being honest, I didn't want her to hear me talking. If she had walked to my room, I'd be trapped, and in that moment, I felt like that'd be a nightmare. After waiting for half an hour in silence, I mustered up enough courage to at least observe and see what she was up to. Forcing myself up, I cracked the door open just enough to get a clear view of the hallway and look at where she was sitting. If I didn't know any better, I'd have thought she had legitimately just stumbled into the wrong house and was relaxing like any normal person. But something was off. It almost looked as if she was slumped forward on the couch. Part of me wanted to believe she was sleeping, but what I saw next shattered all hope of that. She reached a disgustingly long arm towards the door and unlocked it from her seated position with ease. I haven't measured yet, but eyeballing the distance from my couch to the door, it had to be at least 8 or 9 feet away on the low end. She slowly stood up and made a clumsy effort to walk towards it. Her body was horrifying. She was tall, uncomfortably so. If I had to guess, I'd say she was maybe over 9 feet, with arms that touched the ground and dragged behind her. Her hands each sported roughly 11 fingers, that had to each be around a foot in length. From what I remember, she was completely naked, with sagging skin that hung loosely off her extremely thin body. She was also paler than I thought possible. Her skin appeared almost gray, and if I didn't know any better, I'd think her skin belonged to that of someone recently deceased. She didn't move gracefully. She dragged her massive body towards the door and raised her long arm towards the doorknob to pull it open. It almost looked like she had to break her own bones to complete the movement. But as she pulled the door open and moved a spindly leg outside, she stopped. My blood ran cold as she slowly turned her head towards me, and I caught a glimpse of her face. I wanted to scream when I didn't see any eyes, just a puffy exterior with sagging eye holes, and a mouth with long, rubbery lips that drooped past her shoulders in a permanent look of anguish. I didn't know if she saw me, or if she even had the capability to. All I remember was her turning her head back outside and leaving my home. She shut the door behind her, and I was left in silence with my heart pumping faster than it ever did before. I rushed outside with my phone to see if I could catch her on video, and I wish I hadn't. I wish I had just closed the door and gone to sleep, or gotten drunk and tried to pass the whole thing off as a messed up nightmare. But what I saw was... I know it was real. I looked outside in the cold dark, and I saw her hanging off the side of the building like a spider. The window of the person above me was open. She was fishing inside, and after a few seconds of searching, she pulled out their son. Her hand was completely wrapped around the head, and I couldn't tell if they were alive or dead by the time she slinked off into the darkness with the young boy. I had caught it all on video. I must have watched that video 100 times before deleting it. I mean, what was I supposed to do with it? You think the police would believe it's a real piece of evidence? Even if they did, what could they do? And as a parent, are you better off thinking that your kid ran away, or knowing that it was taken by an entity that we can't even begin to comprehend? At least with the former, you have the hope that maybe you'll see them again. I just couldn't bring myself to bring up such a crazy notion to a grieving family. Or worse, have them believe me and go looking for something that no one should ever try and find. I knew as long as I kept it, I'd be tempted to watch it, and every time I watched it, I'd be driven farther into madness. There's been more stories of missing kids lately too. I've even heard some rumors about pets going missing from people's homes. Surprisingly enough, I even heard a story about a full-grown man disappearing. He was never seen again, with absolutely no trace of where he went or why he left. The only thing suggesting any kind of outside force was an open window, and a few strands of hair police couldn't match any DNA to. This has taken quite the toll on my life. I tried to find info on this thing, but as far as I know, there's nothing. If anyone out there has had a similar experience, please tell your story, or share images of the thing if you have them. I just want to know I'm not crazy. I'm quitting my job tomorrow, and staying with my brother on the other side of the country. There's no way I'm sticking around that thing more than I need to. I don't plan on being here much longer, but last night I heard a knocking at my door. I know the next time I see it, I won't be telling a story afterwards. But I also know I'm never coming back to this apartment building ever again. My hobby is collecting dolls. Choose an era and I'll show you a doll. I have a Cabbage Patch Kids doll from the 80s, with its squished up face and plump starfish hands. I have one of the first Barbies, with her pinched in waist and pneumatic bosoms. I even have a hand-knitted gollywog that belonged to one of those old cowboys of the 50s. Take a look around my doll room and you'll see Kewpie dolls, rag dolls, fairground dolls, fashion dolls, China dolls, and baby dolls. I have a doll room. You might call it a hobby, but I call it a lifestyle. My latest doll, the one that has me worried, is a custom French bisque Beeb, with stiff arms and staring eyes. I'd wanted one for a while as I needed a dancing partner for my other French bisque. I couldn't believe my luck when I stumbled across this beauty down at the local Salvo store. It was on the forgotten bottom shelf, tossed into a box with two mangy, one-eyed teddies, a broken spinning top, and a wooden jigsaw puzzle, with either one or two pieces missing, depending on whether you like cats or not. The box lot had $5 scrawled across the side of it in permanent marker. I picked it up in delight and ran to the counter. The guy didn't even look up when I paid. Obviously, not everybody can appreciate art when they see it. The rest of the toys went straight into the trash can as soon as I left the store. My gorgeous doll didn't need to be associating herself with the likes of them. I inspected the craft work and all of the immaculate, handmade glory. The curled hair, painted face, tiny eyelashes, and delicate stitching. I was hesitant, afraid to lift her skirt and look for the stamp, afraid that I was mistaken. But there it was, Savoy, France. I'm telling you, I had to stop myself from doing an excited little dance right there on the street. For a measly $5, I had a doll worth around $550 at auction. That's some return on investment. Not that I figured on selling her anytime soon. I took her home, tenderly bathed her with a damp cloth and a touch of dish detergent, and let her go to her final resting place, right next to her sister. She looked great, I tell you. Fantastic, actually. If you looked past her slightly googly glass eyes and sharp bared teeth. To be fair, that was the style of the time. I guess they thought it looked realistic, but I don't know about that. Nonetheless, my doll room had just received an upgrade. I had her for about a week or so before I started to notice something strange. First off, my dog, who never bothered too much about that room, began to act really interested in what was inside. I'd catch him scratching at the door, shoving his nose up close to the crack beneath it, and whining to get in. I ignored him for a bit, and I started to worry that maybe a family of mice had moved in. The last thing I need is for my precious doll collection to be chewed up by a bunch of rodents. I let him in, and he went straight across to the new doll, growling and snarling at her, with his ears flattened back against his skull. I called him away, but he didn't listen. I had to grab him by the collar and drag him. Odd, yeah, but he's acted odd in the past, so whatever. I shut the door and forgot about it. Forgot all about it. Until I went to bed last night, that is. My bedroom is on the top floor, above the doll room, and it's a peaceful type of place. I call it my retreat from the outside world, my sanctuary. I have a TV in the corner, a comfy chair for reading, a walk-in closet, and an attached bathroom with a jacuzzi-style bathtub. It's nice, and I make sure to keep it that way. I had just finished showering when I saw it. the doll. She was draped casually across the seat of my chair, as if someone had tossed her there, and staring glassily at me with those fake blue eyes. I thought I'd imagined it at first. I live alone, have been since Maureen up and left 2 years ago, and I knew I hadn't brought the doll up to my room. I picked her up and stared at her, wondering if maybe I was showing the first signs of early onset dementia. I've heard it can creep up on a person fast. Weirdest feeling, but it felt as if the doll was staring back at me, her eyes following mine, and for the briefest second, I thought she might have even moved in my hand. I took her back downstairs, feeling a bit shook up, and I placed her back in the doll room. I locked the door too. Thing is, the whole incident put the wind up me a bit. I've seen the movies, Chucky and Dolly Dearest, and I know there are a few tales out there about supposedly possessed dolls. Not that I ever believed them, of course. It took me a while to get to sleep after that, and I don't generally have trouble sleeping. I must have finally drifted off because when I woke up the sun was shining through the curtains. And that's when things got real. I rolled over and there she was. The doll, staring back at me from the pillow. Some long-lost lover come to pay old Jethro a visit. I was out of that bed before my eyes were fully open, and I'm not proud to say it, but that unholy shriek belonged to me. My dog started barking from the laundry room, and I was out that door and down the stairs without bothering to stop to grab a robe, or even put on a pair of pants. I'm still down here now, pacing around downstairs and trying to make sense of it. I pulled on some dirty clothes I found in the laundry room, and I've already googled the names of a couple of exorcists. There's a few thumps and bangs coming from my room, and I'm trying to get the guts to go up there, but I don't know if I want to see what I'll find. For as long as I can remember, my family has owned this little cabin in northern Michigan. Originally it served as a hunting lodge for my grandfather and his friends, but when he passed away my father inherited it. We spent many weekends there over the years, but once my brother and I left home, the place was used less and less. Eventually my parents began renting it out to people looking for a quiet stay in the woods, an Airbnb type of deal. The cabin sits on 20 acres of land deep in the woods. The closest neighbors are half a mile away, and the nearest town is 20 miles away. Perfect for those looking to get away from it all. They've been renting the place out for years with no problems at all. Until last winter, that is. Last December, a couple requested to book the cabin for a week. Dad doesn't like to rent the place out in the winter, mostly because it's heated by a wood-burning stove that requires a ton of wood to be chopped in preparation, and also because he has to pay someone to come plow out all of the snow, and it can be pricey. The couple, a wealthy doctor and his wife, said they'd pay triple if they had to. All the other places they had tried were booked through the holidays, and it was the week of their anniversary. My dad reluctantly agreed, and made all the necessary calls to get the place opened up. He called me on December 20th, and asked if I could drive up to the cabin. It was only about 45 minutes from where I was staying at the time, and meet with the couple, let them in, show them around, etc. He had come down with the flu and couldn't make it, so I said I would. As I drove down the cabin's long drive the next afternoon, a winter storm advisory was going on the radio. The roads were clear for now, but there would be 24 to 30 inches of snow by the next afternoon, it warned. A record-breaking storm for the area, according to the meteorologist. I felt a little uneasy and decided I'd give the couple an opportunity to pack out with a full refund if they wanted. With the storm coming, I didn't think it would be wise for them to be stranded up there alone, especially since cell phone signal in those parts is, for the most part, non-existent, and plows can take a few days to get to the back roads. When I reached the cabin, I saw a shiny black Mustang parked out front, and felt a sense of dread that I can hardly describe or make sense of. I had this sudden urge to tell these people that the deal was off, and that they needed to go somewhere, anywhere else. Instead, I parked my car, got out, and walked over to greet them. I could tell that they weren't from the area as soon as I saw them. The man was wearing an expensive-looking suit, and the woman had on a fur coat and designer heels. Not exactly proper winter gear for the climate. "Hi, Claire Lane. My dad is the one who owns this place. I believe you spoke on the phone?" I said as I stuck my hand out to shake the man's and then the woman's. "Yeah," the man said, looking me over. "We really appreciate him agreeing to let us stay on such short notice." He paused. "Of course, I'll make it worth his while." As the man whom I came to know is Dr. Grant Oswald, and I went over the details of their stay. Mrs. Oswald went up to the porch steps and walked over to the window, peering inside. "This place is perfect, Grant," she called over happily. "It's even better than the pictures." Grant looked at me and smiled. I took them inside as we walked through the front door. I breathed a small sigh of relief. The wood burner was going in the far corner of the living room, and the place was nice and warm. My dad's friend Jimmy from down the road had already been by, and gotten the wood chopped and the fire started. That was one less thing for me to worry about. I showed them around, and gave them a little history on the place. They seemed like nice enough people, but I still had that nagging feeling telling me they shouldn't be there. Before I left, I gave them their out. "Look, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there's a storm coming. It's expected to drop a couple feet of snow, and you're a long way from any kind of help if something were to happen. If the weather is bad enough, it might be a while before someone can come plow you out. I'm not sure if it's a good idea for you to stay here given the circumstances." I stared at them carefully as I said this, and saw what looked like an expression of fear, or concern, flash across Mrs. Oswald's face. "We'll be fine," Grant assured me with a good-natured grin. "We've brought enough food and supplies to last a week, and it looks like there's enough wood out there to heat this place for a whole month, if need be." "Okay, but if you find yourself needing anything, there's an old CB radio in the back bedroom upstairs. Most of the old-timers around here have them. You might be able to reach someone that way. We do have our cell phones." Mrs. Oswald laughed. "They won't do you much good up here," I told her. At this, they both pulled out their phones and looked at them. No bars. As I left there that day, that gut feeling refused to subside, but I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid and I continued home. It had been 5 days since the Oswalds had checked into the cabin, and every night since, I had been plagued with strange nightmares. It was the same one every time. It started with me driving down that long driveway to the cabin. I'd get out of my truck and that's when I'd see the paw prints. Thousands of huge, bloody paw prints, all around the property, and leading up to the porch steps to the cabin's wide open door. The door would then slam shut, and I would wake up drenched in a cold sweat, unable to shake that dreadful feeling. I decided that enough was enough. I would drive to the cabin that day and check on the Oswalds. Prove to myself that this whole thing was just some weird reaction to the stress I'd been under lately, with school and my new job. The ride up wasn't that bad. The storm had dropped a solid 22 inches, but the plows had been out full force over the last 2 days, so the main roads were mostly clear. I called Jimmy and asked if the back roads had been cleared. He said they had. So far, so good. I told him about my plans of going to go check on the Oswalds, but left out the parts about the nightmares and strange intuitions. I didn't want to make myself look crazy, if this turned out to be nothing. He said I was more than welcome to stop by and have dinner with him and his wife, Maureen, when I was finished, and I said that I would. It was nearly 5 p.m. when I arrived at the cabin. The first thing I noticed was that, despite the fact that the sun had nearly set, all the lights were off inside. I put my pickup in 4-wheel drive and pulled up next to the black Mustang, which was now partially buried in a snowdrift. As I approached it, I noticed the second odd thing. The driver's side door was wide open. When I looked inside, I saw the keys dangling from the ignition. There was snow inside piled on the seat and floor, so I knew it had to have been like that for a while. As I walked around towards the porch, I saw the paw prints. My blood ran cold. I stood there for a minute just listening, but there was only silence. I walked up the porch steps. The snow was knee-deep and I could feel it soaking through my jeans. I could see that the door was slightly ajar, so I quickly shoved it open with my foot and went inside. The house was ice cold. The wood burner held nothing but old ashes, and I knew that the fire had to have been out for at least a day or two. "Dr. Oswald?" I called out. "Mrs. Oswald? Is anyone here?" Silence. I went to the hall closet where my parents kept all of our old yard games and sports equipment, and grabbed the baseball bat that had once belonged to my brother. I didn't know what, if anything, I might encounter, but there was a huge part of me that had to get to the bottom of it. I turned on the living room lights and looked around. The first thing I saw was that the large, overstuffed sofa, where my brother and I had spent our rainy days watching movies, had been completely torn to shreds. Stuffing, bits of fabric, and splinters from its wooden frame were scattered around the room. I treaded quietly into the kitchen and noticed that it had been trashed too. The dining table was on its side, and there were what looked like teeth marks on the legs. The chairs had been torn to pieces, and the refrigerator was wide open, half-eaten food and empty wrappers surrounding it. This was really, really bad. I knew at that point I had two choices. I could go upstairs and check the bedrooms, or I could run outside, jump in my truck, and get out of there, and let the police handle the rest. For whatever reason, I felt this overwhelming urge to go upstairs, so that's what I did. When I got to the top of the stairs, I caught a whiff of something rancid, and instantly recognized it as that unforgettable smell of death and decay. I peered into the first bedroom and saw nothing out of the ordinary. When I looked into the second bedroom was when I saw it. A leg. A human leg. It was on the floor beside the bed. It was almost completely stripped of any flesh or muscle except for the foot, which was somehow intact. I figured it belonged to Mrs. Oswald because the toenails were painted bright red. I stifled a scream and ran for the stairs. My curiosity had officially run out, and all I wanted to do was get out of there. As I rounded the corner and put my foot on the first step, I heard a loud crash that came from downstairs. I stood at the top of the stairs and stared down. I saw a large shadow pass by in the light that was coming from the kitchen. Then I heard the growl. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, and it filled me with a kind of terror I haven't felt before, or since. I ran down the hall and into the third bedroom, the door that had belonged to my parents. I shut the door as quietly as I could and locked it. When I turned around, I saw Dr. Oswald, or what was left of him anyway. There was a rib cage laying on the bed that had been picked clean, and his head was on the floor only 2 feet from where I was standing. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth seemed to be frozen in a permanent scream. The walls and carpet were covered in dry blood. I held my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming, but hot tears began to run down my face. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Slow, heavy footsteps. My heart felt like it was going to explode in my chest. I could hear the thing rummaging around the 2 other rooms, and I knew it wouldn't be long before it made its way to the one I was in. I laid on the floor and looked under the door. I saw the shadow of 2 feet walk by, and then come back and stop in front of the door. God help me. Whatever was on the other side of that door started sniffing, like a dog does when it's caught an interesting scent. I gripped the baseball bat in both hands, but now doubted that it would do me any good. I had a moment of clarity and remembered the CB radio. It was on the floor behind me. It looked as if Dr. Oswald may have tried to use it. I clicked it on and grabbed the microphone. "Hello? I don't know if anyone is listening right now, but I need help," I pleaded, just above a whisper. There was no response. "Please, if anyone can hear me, I'm at the Lane cabin on mile 7. Something terrible has happened. I need help sent right away." I shrieked into the mic desperately. There was no doubt now that the thing outside had heard me. It began clawing at the door frantically, and I could hear splinters of wood hitting the floor outside. I knew it wouldn't be long before that thing broke through. I finally heard a voice come through on the CB, but there was too much static for me to understand what they were saying. I wasn't sure if they had even heard my message, and I was running out of time. The door was only seconds away from losing its battle, so I ran to the window and opened it quietly. I climbed out onto the roof and looked over the edge. It was maybe a 15-foot drop. but I thought I might be okay if I managed to land in one of the snowdrifts. Just then I heard the bedroom door inside break open. I looked back and saw the creature standing in the window looking at me. I instantly knew what it was now. There was no confusion anymore. It stood there for a moment, regarding me. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the moon was illuminating the creature like a spotlight. I could see that its thick, black fur was matted in old blood. Its eyes were reflecting the light in such a way that they looked like two glowing orbs. It bared its teeth and growled, saliva dripping from its treacherous jaws. Its long teeth perfectly capable of taking a person's head off in one swift bite. I hesitated for a second, and then jumped as the creature broke through the window and clambered onto the roof after me. I hit the ground hard and struggled to my feet. I heard the creature jump down after me, and a moment later, I was feeling its hot breath on the back of my neck. It grabbed the back of my coat and yanked me towards it. My feet left the ground, and I knew it was all over for me. Then I heard a gunshot. The creature let out a yelp and fell to the ground, bringing me down with it. It clumsily raced to its feet and ran for the woods. The person who had fired the first shot fired two more after it, but they both missed. The creature disappeared into the darkness, leaving a trail of thick, black blood in its wake. A second later, there was a long, ear-splitting howl that echoed through the forest and then silence. "Claire?" a voice said. "Are you alright?" It was Jimmy. "It's real," I said quietly, feeling almost in a state of shock. "It's really real." "Sure it is," he replied. "Now let's get out of here before it decides to come back. I wounded it, but they heal fast. This is the last night of the full moon. Once morning hits, it will return to whatever hell it came from, at least for a while." I thought it was just a dumb campfire story the old-timers told to scare us as kids. "The stories start from a bit of truth," he said gently. He offered me his hand and helped me off the ground. "You can ride with me back to my place and stay with Maureen and I for the night. We'll be safe there. But the people who were staying here, they're..." I began to sob. "I'll call down to the station in the morning. I don't want anyone else coming here right now. Not until morning." I stared out the window as we drove. Neither of us said a word. The nursery rhyme from my childhood played in my head again and again, threatening to drive me mad. Every 7 years, in the full moon's light, there comes a dog who walks upright. Unlucky souls who cross his trail never lived to tell the tale. The police listed the cause of death for the Oswalds as an animal attack, and I guess they weren't entirely wrong. Jimmy and I didn't bother correcting them. Sheriff McCoy knew the truth, as well as we did. The deep woods hold secrets only the locals understand.